Anyways, great to see you, and welcome to the Satellite and NTN Summit here in Vegas. My name's Tim Hatt. I work for GSMA Intelligence, which is the analyst arm of the GSMA. We're the research and consulting group, and within our remit of covering topics across the telco sector, satellite has become, kind of a keystone topic the last 2 years. For those of you who were here last year, you may know we had a summit last year on this topic. A lot has changed in 12 months. You might ask, why are we doing another one? Well, it's because there's just a lot to talk about. And we've had them around the world, actually, in Barcelona, in China, here in Vegas. And so I think the common thing we're seeing is that there is a big convergence happening between the telco sector and satellite companies, and we really want to have a platform to discuss what that all means. So the way it's going to work, we have about 2.5 hours today. I'm going to kick off to bring in some of our latest data and insights that I think is important to sort of set the table with. We are going to have 3 keynotes, 2 from our partners here from Viavi and Iridium, and then Ericsson will be joining us as well for the final keynote. And in between those, we have 2 panels with leading figures from across the sector, both telcos and satellites and everybody in between. So I'm really thinking we're going to get a great discussion. I will try to make time for questions from the audience. I know there are a lot of people here, so we may not have time to take all of those, but what we don't, we'll certainly take offline, and we'd encourage you to get in touch. All right. I think it's important to first look at, when we talk about satellite, and I've showed this, or a version of this slide before, why does it matter now? Like, what keeps changing? And we sort of bucket it into these 3 categories. Part of it is just the technology works now, and there's a pragmatism around the need to fill or extend mobile networks terrestrially into areas that are difficult or uneconomic to connect through satellite, and that there's kind of a win-win situation in being able to capitalize on some of the new revenues available both in the consumer segment and the business. And I think that's what leads into the second bucket here around tapping new revenues. We'll come on to this, a lot of people know about the coverage gap in different parts of the world, and that presenting an obvious rationale for extending networks through satellite, but even as important, and I think this is a growing area, is the IoT dimension. We'll talk about that in some of the panels today, looking at how you can connect devices from different industries through this connectivity. And then, looking ahead, we'll get into this as well. The standards changes 3GPP has totally changed the addressable market for what we're talking about, particularly for direct-to-cell service. And I think looking ahead, where that goes with devices is an open question. Where we go with performance is an open question. But these are all things we're looking at closely, and that's why it matters this year. The other sort of important context slide is just to look from a pure capacity level. The entrance of the low Earth orbit players, starting with Starlink and then expanding out to a number of other companies. We'll have AST here amongst others today, I think is leading to a huge increase in the amount of network capacity in space. And you see that through this hockey stick style chart of the green line. You look back 10 years ago, satellite has been going 20 or 30 years. It's not a new technology, so what's changed? Well, what's changed is that you've had low Earth orbit constellations coming in and sort of remaking the cost structure so that you could increase not only capacity, but the economics for a terrestrial operator of partnering with that to provide service to their customers. And that has a whole bunch of implications depending on the use cases you're talking about. But I think that's really continuing to grow. There are a lot of people taking pictures here. You're very welcome to do that, but these numbers we'll distribute after as well. One of the things we have started to do in the last 6 months is track this stuff. in terms of partnerships between telco operators and satellite groups. And what this data in the chart is showing is sort of a regional breakdown of mobile operators that have satellite partnerships. Now, don't get too bogged down in the number, but the main thing that I think is worth saying is that if you look over here, you've got 91 operators. That's groups, not just networks. So if Vodafone has 10 countries in Europe, that counts as one here, not 10. So that's 91 groups, but you have about 60, it's actually north of that now, it's about 65% global market share covered. That means operators representing 65% of people with a mobile phone now have an active satellite partnership. Why does that matter? It means that the footprint is there for this type of service. Two, that was 30% 18 months ago. So that's a doubling rate of a year, and that's very, very fast. Now, you might think that's a herd mentality. In some cases, there's competitive intensity that drives that, but a lot of this is really around seeing the fundamental logic of the partnerships and being able to access those revenue streams. Now, this is a kind of map view showing that data across the world. And what we're showing here is sort of, you can see the blue is where there is connectivity of satellite in partnerships with telco operators that's in the testing phase, it hasn't launched yet. And then the red and the sort of turquoise are where you have live services available right now from at least one, or in some cases more than one operator. Now, we track this every month. The pictures change on this map every month. Might be a bit out of date now because things change literally by the week. But you can see that, again, I talk about 65% market share. There aren't that many parts. There's parts of the Middle East and parts of North Africa that have yet to get involved. There isn't that many parts of the rest of the world where this service is not going to be available. This is a global phenomenon. Now, from the satellite provider side, it's important to understand what the competitive landscape looks like. Now, this is showing, there are a number of ways you can slice this data, but this is showing the actual satellite constellation footprint of different providers going right now. Starlink, of course, with an Elon Musk stable, is the market leader. It has about 6,400 satellites live in orbit now. It has a planned constellation that goes up to 12,000. That's just phase one. If they get phase two approved, that will go further north. But it's brought in a huge amount of competition from other players. Amazon has an initiative you probably know about called Kuiper. Hasn't really got to a commercial point, but they're very ambitious on their plans. You see Eutelsat OneWeb, Telesat up in Canada. Chris from AST will bring in their perspective today. So I think this is a really dynamic, place going on. And again, you just simply didn't see that 3 or 4 years ago. This is a slightly different way to make that point. Again, this is, lots of people are taking pictures, fine to do that, but we'll send this around after. The main point of this data is actually showing the partnerships of the market leaders in terms of, certainly from a low Earth orbit perspective, what they look like, but also one thing we track is what type of use case is being serviced through the satellite model. BTS is sort of backhaul connectivity. That's traditionally what you see from satellite companies. What's really changed now, though, is this direct-to-device, or a lot of people call it direct-to-cell, where you now have that accounting for, kind of about half the partnerships. Now, in many cases, you'll have both services, but this sort of, the 3GPP standards now incorporating non-terrestrial network connectivity has paved the way for this service to be offered. Now, most of this is still waiting in the wings. The partnerships have been formed, but they're not commercially live, but that will change. If I look at that in a tree chart, this is showing the sort of telco operator side. What does it look like for the largest carriers around the world? And what this is showing is hopefully a kind of easy, digestible view of the subscriber footprint of operators that have satellite partnerships. So unsurprisingly, the biggest squares are for the operators in the most populous countries, China Mobile, or the Indian operators, Jio and Bharti, et cetera. That's not showing, by the way, the number of people that are using satellite. It's showing the mobile customer base of the companies that have partnered with the satellite company. The interesting question will be how much of those eventually tap into satellite over time. The point I'd actually make from this slide, though, is in the title, and there's a promiscuity phenomenon going on where actually a lot of operators are hedging their bets by partnering with multiple satellite companies. And the reason for that is that there are economic benefits of that. There's also a degree of experimentation going around which technologies are most likely to work. Give you guys a sec to finish your pictures. Guys, I'm sorry about all the people on the side. I appreciate you. We really appreciate you coming. I wish we had a little bit more seats, but stick with us. Oh, yeah. So this is just quick. I'm going to talk for about 5 more minutes, and then we're going to have Sammy come up from Biabi. This is showing sort of the consumer rationale. This is use cases looking in the coverage gap. I'm not going to spend much time on this. Suffice to say, there's still about 7% of the world that lives outside of terrestrial coverage. That's like 450 million people. That's a big number. So that's one of the standard reasons why this is going towards the consumer base. But equally, and I mentioned this before, the IoT opportunity is equally interesting. And what this is showing is we've done some modeling looking at the addressable base of devices, not people, IoT devices in different industries that we think can tap into satellite capability. It's about 2 to 3 billion, and I think that's probably on the conservative side. But you see the breakdown, and it's not just sort of low-value devices in the energy sector like weather meters and smart meters. It actually is getting into precision agriculture. It's getting into trucking. And I think some of the panelists will speak to their lived experiences of trying to tap into this. So the IoT, has a financial rationale, and we think this is a really growing part of the sector. Just last couple of slides before I hand over. So, one of the questions we are often asked is sort of, okay, it's all great that people need the coverage, but the other question is, will they pay for it? We did some surveys in the summer across 10 countries looking at people's perceptions of their existing mobile network coverage, which is what you see here. And it's sort of a good news, bad news. The good news is that coverage at home the satisfaction rates are fairly good, but they go down as you start transiting in a country or going abroad. Now, that then translates into this question, which is, okay, you tell us that you want better coverage, you tell us that you're interested in having a mobile provider that will have satellite connectivity as part of its offering, how much more would you pay? Now, this is the data we get back. So two last things I'll say. One is, take this with a grain of salt. What people say they will pay versus what they actually pay are often two different things. But, the average comes out at about 7 or 8%. Okay, so inflation's running at what, 3 in the US, a little bit lower in the UK, other countries. That's not a bad number. And when you actually extrapolate that out across the whole customer base of the operators that have partnerships, that's actually quite a material revenue opportunity. Okay, so that's hopefully gives a data point that I think is worth highlighting. This is just what we wrap this up to in terms of a total revenue opportunity, and when we add up the consumer, the B2B, and the government sectors, we think it's about $30 billion annually by 2035. About 2 to 3% of existing telco revenues. Okay. What's that? Right, last slide before I hand over to Sammy from Viavi. I started out with why do we care about this now? Why are we talking about it now? Equally important is to sort of ask, where do we go from here? And this is kind of the point of why we're having this discussion today. I don't have all the answers to these questions. I don't. But when we look in the technology domain, when we look in business model, people often don't talk about the regulation, but that's a very, very important factor here. How do we, collectively as an industry address these topics? Right now, if you're looking at a direct-to-cell service, that's still sort of 3G-like speeds, 4 or 5 megabit. You're not going to be watching Netflix on that. Can you get up to a higher streaming speed? Do you get lower latencies? Do we see more experimentation in the business model? And on the regulatory side, do we get to a point where you have sort of solidification of the spectrum models that are happening now? We see people using, mobile satellite spectrum. We see others trying to repurpose terrestrial spectrum. How does that work over time, and what are the implications in terms of commercialization in different countries as you navigate those regulatory questions? Cool. I hope that has given a flavor to start. We got a lot of content to get to, and you guys probably don't want to hear more from me. So I am going to hand over shortly. This is just a selection of our research and trackers that we publish on the satellite sector. We'll distribute these after. This will be on our website, but if you want to get the QR codes, you're more than welcome, and we'd encourage you to go and check that out. So let's have a great discussion. And our first speaker is going to be coming to us from Viavi. It is Sami Yamani, who is their CTO and is a very well-versed man in all things technology. So Sami, come on up.
No, I like it this way. Thank you, Tim. A lot of people may not know much about Viavi. I mean, some of you may know us by our original name, GDSU. But I'm actually going to give a different perspective, what we're seeing from the non-terrestrial network. We are a test and measurements company, but we also do more than that. And one specific thing, when we talk about maturity of the non-terrestrial network and how it's going to work with what 3GPP is trying to do is, integration between terrestrial and non-terrestrial network, which we believe that's going to go. AI is going to play a very important role. And Viavi actually, with the experience that we have, play a very important role here. This is a small video. It just tells you what we have been doing a little bit in AI.
By 2025, the amount of data we generate is expected to grow to 175 zettabytes. That's 150 times more bytes of data than stars in the observable universe. It's at this stage of massive data explosion and the exponential growth of computing power that AI begins to flourish. You might have seen AI in your daily life, but in our hyper-connected world, AI is also a silent force that ensures seamless communication. Today, instant connectivity is a ubiquitous part of life. But beneath the surface lies a puzzle of immense complexity, a series of interconnected networks that constantly evolve. AI's powerful algorithm, intelligence, and predictive power serve as the catalyst for tomorrow's highly automated, zero-touch networks. Users throughout a network ecosystem can leverage AI to streamline network management, reduce operational costs, and ensure agility and reliability. Thanks to rapid detection of network issues and self-healing mechanisms, as well as automatic configuration and optimization. In addition, through the use of digital twins, complex networks can be deployed with minimal risk. Not only can configurations be optimized, tested, and certified before any real-world deployment, but historical data and machine learning scenarios mimicking real environments can be leveraged to predict the effects of configurations on end-user services. AI ensures that as the network grows, it can adapt and expand without significant manual intervention. New devices and services can be added to the network seamlessly, giving rise to complex, demanding, and ultra-low latency applications that will change the way we live and work. From AI optimizing AI to digital twins, Viavi cutting-edge solutions ensure a seamless and secure digital experience for all. What will AI unlock next? Let's find out and advance boldly together.
So, as I said, Viavi get involved in a lot of testing technology. Our history has been actually 100 years, actually last year, in business. And our history comes from a lot of photonics and fiber optic testing. And actually, we get involved in NTN much earlier on because we build a lot of their free space optics communications and component. But definitely on the wireless side, if you think about what Viavi does from 1G to 5G. We have been involved in all testing in the labs, testing in the environment, helping installation, and making sure that you can get optimized network from 5G, and now we're working 6G, but now we get involved in non-terrestrial network and other applications. And AI plays a very important role in that, in terms of it's enabling this new technology that we call the digital twin. And it's actually today, we provide these non-terrestrial network digital twin to help satellites operators, as well as integration with telecommunications, to actually test a lot of these use cases and see the maturity of the non-terrestrial network. Is it there or not, and what do we need to do, and what are the gaps, and how we can improve these gaps. And definitely also, you see cloud-based playing a very important role in moving the software into the network. So let's talk a little bit about the non-terrestrial network. As Tim was saying, we are seeing a lot of use cases out there. I mean, a lot of you, if you have an iPhone and you get the new iOS, they actually now have a new service where you can actually start texting immediately, and you can choose satellite networks for that. But we're seeing a lot of other vertical markets. As Tim was saying, IoT for agriculture, for autonomous driving, for government, for disaster recovery. There is so many other use cases there. And one of the most important thing for these use cases is the need for 100% guaranteed coverage. And in other applications, looking more for autonomy, kind of low latency applications, security applications. So these are the kind of use cases that we are seeing being deployed or used or provided as part of the NTN use cases. And there are today, when we look at, especially when we're talking about where 3GPP is coming, trying to define the interoperability between NTN and terrestrial network, there are two main architectures. I mean, we already talked about direct to device, but there are what we call regenerative architecture and the transparent. And in the regenerative one, the actual base station or the G node B is deployed on the satellite, right? Where in the transparent is kind of what he's saying, is connecting to the BTS, and the G node B is on the ground. Now, there is a lot of flexibility in this architecture, and every satellite and telco are working on different scenarios, and that's where, when we talk about digital twin, testing what works for what use cases is very important to understand, right? There is also the discussion about moving some of the user plane up on the satellite, so can you actually do some AI application there? Some of the use cases can be on the space side. And of course, putting the antenna or the RU on the satellite, and how you're gonna also enable some of the more split technology like Open RAN with NTN. So 3GPP have been involved. We've been working with them recently with release 17 and release 18, defining different ways of communication, with NB, IoT, the IoT devices, different kind of orbits, LEO, GEO. I mean, this have been discussion for a long time, not just release 17. But more and more with LEO, it's more on release 17, release 18, and defining some of these mobility capabilities and mobility challenges as well that we need to figure out. So one of the challenges they see now, this is where Viavi gets involved. I talked about free space optics itself. There are a lot of innovation that needs to happen there. But you have to talk about the nature and physics of NTN communications. Talk about propagation delays, Doppler effect, link budgets, timing. Accurate precision timing is a very key requirement here, especially when we will try to decide where the location of the UE is. And of course, mobility is a big thing. I mean, for some of you who tested the SOS, I mean, you have 6 minutes sometimes to just try to find where the satellite is. And when you start doing handover, that becomes a big of an issue, right? And of course, handover itself, I mean, we tell you from actual, just the reality, even on the 5G network, is one of the issues that you always have to test. But if think about this handover with satellites moving with Doppler effect, the actual storm of these random acknowledgement, channel acknowledgement and access is a huge thing, right? So these are one of the challenges that we need to test and find out solution from it. Also integration, trying to integrate where we want to put some of the intelligence. You want to put it on the satellites, you want to put it on the terrestrial side, on the device. I mean, there is a lot of discussion depending on the use cases you want to look at. And also the integration with other non-3GPP non-terrestrial networks and trying to combine this into a unified core. And of course, security is one of the bigger things. I mean, even though you're talking about GPS, but we're seeing jamming scenarios where you need to take care about that. So these are a lot of the challenges that we need to look at. And this is one of the areas that Viavi gets involved. We do a lot of emulation to actually test these scenarios in the lab, testing them in the field, provide a solution that is monitoring and providing security access and security vulnerability test for some of these activities. Right, so if you think about this concept of digital twin, the idea is that you will be able to build a scenario, because all the time when you're trying to actually come up with an innovation, here is what we're gonna do handover, how are you gonna test that, right? Especially when the satellite's up there. So we provide a digital twin. It's a scenario where we can build a lot of the data we have been collecting so far from 4G, 5G network, from other deployment, and we build these digital representation of all the different components so that you actually have realistic behavior and scenario analysis that you can actually start testing the innovation. And we do this at every element of the network. So I'll give you some examples, for example, for this non-terrestrial network. Let's say you want to actually test putting the base station on the satellites. We have emulation working with Roder and Schwartz. We pull emulation, channel emulation, as if we are emulating a device communicating with this satellites. We can test one device, 10 devices, IoT devices, cars moving with IoT device, different scenarios to test how mature this technology is, how performing this technology is. And we also can emulate a core network on the other end, right? So this is for the regenerative part. For the transparent, we can actually start testing on, on the base station side and having the communication with the satellites. The same thing, you can test the actual RAN, right? Which part of what we call the base station, CU. So you test it either, with the satellite or as part of the satellite. So we can build these scenarios in the lab, communicating with satellites, and you can test all of these different combination of technologies. Also testing the satellite itself. I mean, this handover scenario, testing the link, understanding the link capacity, finding out if you have the right resources, how we can optimize. So if you have an optimization technology, and we use a lot of AI techniques to actually take the data and create kind of regenerative scenario, regression testing scenario that you didn't think of, right? And of course, one of the things is also we can test the core by itself, just understanding, can the core take care of some of these transactions? Do you need any kind of slicing in the core? We also can do a lot of these testing. So the concept of this digital twin is, again, evaluate how you can perform some of these gap analysis, test, and then deploy, and we can actually manage the deployment, right? And we use one of our famous, emulation tests that has been there with the wireless technology that now we adopted, working with Roder and Schwartz to actually adopt it to actually test NTN, right? So this the actual setup, and we have in the booth here if you want to see some of the actual demo. This is set up between what Viavi can do on the protocol side, what Roder and Schwartz can do on the channel emulation side, and you can actually see this actual test. We have this deployed in several operators, with also working with satellites communication. So this is actually today in deployment, and it shows some of the gaps that we have in the technology, where the maturity is, and how we can improve that. Okay. I'm just gonna go quickly also on, you can actually even test it with different kind of IoT devices, different kind of software. So it's not just you have to have a real UE to test with that. We can emulate different kind of UEs, different kind of interaction between UEs. So these are the other things that we can do. We can also deploy it over the air. So you can not only test it in the lab, but you can actually build some kind of field testing over the air, the same way you can test with an actual device. And here is where the AI comes in place. Creating all of these, what we call scenario generation. If this is an agriculture and you're trying to put a communication on a tractor and you're trying to see how you're going to manage the handover or how you're going to manage capacity with a lot of these pictures, I mean, this is a scenario that you can completely create in the lab with the manufacturer, test different configuration, optimization, and the AI will generate a lot of these data, traffic data, that is very realistic compared to what you see there. We also can bring in, something that is unseen, a disaster, a hurricane comes in, how are you gonna manage that, right? So we can create these kind of realistic scenarios of, a disaster or some kind of event that has to be managed, and you can actually test it in the lab. And we have this for a lot of different things. Between LEO and GEO, you have different frequency settings, different RF configurations, different core network. Is this on an SA? I mean, Tim was talking about all these carriers, but every carrier, by the way, is different, right? Every carrier has different kind of configuration. They don't have the same kind of RAN. Some of them are open, more open. Some of them, one single vendor. This vendor is a black box. And the good news about Viavi is that we come from this business, so we have been testing all of these different things, and we're bringing this expertise into the NTN market. But I can tell you, for experience today, we don't see one single scenario similar to other. Every telco, even within the telco, within the satellites, each one of them is different. So that's a challenge, because if you want to say where is the maturity, there is a lot of factors here that impacts that. And of course, this is where, we're not just talking about 5G, we're already talking about release 19, release 20, how 6G is gonna come into that, the discussion about upper mid-band, especially frequency range 3, bringing this with O-RAN, which is already being deployed in a lot of different operators around the world, and also looking at, doing this, most of the time, some of the discussion with especially IoT and drones, you have to look at also, emulating 3D optimization, beamforming at this kind of elevation. So that there is a lot of different discussion that we're doing in right now with 3GPP. One of the things we did is also looking at, it's very expensive to build these labs. We know that for sure. And if you think about how much you want to create innovation for application players, for small players, I mean, it's a little hard. So we recently got a fund to build a lab as a service, and we are taking this to NTN. So the idea is that if you have a setup that you want to do, you don't have to go in and just build a very expensive lab. You can actually go and build these lab as a service. And the beauty about this lab as a service, it provides, faster go-to-market. You don't have to spend too much CapEx and OpEx. A lot of these times we can provide the expertise. It gives you a much better capabilities to test different scenarios at scale with a lot of performance requirements. And again, you can do complete end-to-end testing with an ecosystem, for example, right? So I know that I only have a couple of minutes, but I just want to point out that, when you look at the NTN, there is definitely the business case, the ROI, and where we are seeing the deployments. We are the guys kind of like non-sexy job here, the plumbing of the network, so we can tell you is it working or not, is it performing or not, what are the gaps, how we can improve them, how we can optimize them. And it is a very important part of understanding how NTN is gonna create. Now, the reality is, it is there. I mean, we are seeing some good results. There is a lot of deployments that is going on. Now, we have still a lot of challenges, but the good news is that the ecosystem is coming together, trying to address these challenges. So, thank you so much. I hope I give you a kind of glimpse of some of the things that happens under the hood, and I will hope that we have more discussions in the panel. Thank you.
All right, Sammy, thank you very much. We will call you back in a bit for our second panel. But yeah, I want to move to our first panel, where we're going to talk a little bit in more detail about the convergence that I talked about and Sammy as well. So if I can welcome up Tim Last from Iridium, Gianluca Radolfi from Sattel IoT, Chris Ivory from AST, and Claude Arpen from Bell. Come on up, guys. Guys, thanks very much for coming up. I know we're kind of sat here. I'm going to try and move my chair into a crescent shape here so we can get a little bit more interactive. We've got 35 minutes for this panel, and I want to use that to delve into more detail around what we're seeing. So I guess, we can talk about why this is all happening, but it's sort of, that question has almost been, I think, addressed so far. I think where I'd like to start is more, what has changed in the last 12 months to accelerate momentum around the satellite telco convergence? I know you'll each come at that from a different perspective, but I want to give you each an opportunity to weigh in on that. And Chris, maybe I can start with you, because I know AST has been one of the most active players.
Yeah, so I'm going to say two things that happened in the last 12 months. Is that there's significantly a higher number of satellites that are on orbit. Of course, I'm going to boast ourselves. We just launched 5 in September, our first 5 commercial satellites. Of course, Starlink has a tremendous amount of satellites up there. But so there's a lot of assets, and they're, including ourselves, we've proven that the technology works. But second, I truly believe, and I want to commend and applaud the FCC for their adopting the framework for the SCS of enabling technology like our direct-to-device, so that clearing the regulatory barriers, because that's one of the most difficult things that we all have to get over, is being able to use terrestrial spectrum from space. And now we're seeing it's a significantly much more accepted from a regulatory standpoint.
Yeah, no, we will certainly come back to that. I know that's a big part of the U.S. Tim, maybe I can bring you in as well. I mean, your perspective on the momentum of the last 12 months.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Hello, everybody. I mean, clearly there's been, technology developments and space-related investments that Chris has already mentioned that have driven, the industry to this point where it's potentially becoming more of a reality. GSMA, 3GPP, and a number of other industry bodies have also played a role in encouraging and promoting the idea of these technologies and seemingly disparate industries coming together to find some common ground. NTN is frankly not a new thing. The satellite industry has been doing non-terrestrial networks for 50 years. What's different now, I think, is that the reality of using, a single device and a single service layer to serve a customer, no matter where they are in the world, is finally becoming a reality. So technology, regulatory, a certain amount of capital that certain people are throwing into the industry that's proving out things as well. So yeah, a number of things.
Claude, if I can come to you now, I mean, you obviously come from an operator and bring that perspective. I'm very interested in how you think about that. Your thoughts in terms of both Bell's overall view of this space and what you think has changed in the last 12 months.
So I'm on the product side so it's a very exciting time for me personally, because I'm unlocking new use cases. So as far as the satellite strategy, I mean, obviously I'm not part of that team, but it's continue our building the best network possible. Canada has got a lot of areas that has no coverage at all. So from a product perspective, when we're talking about, asset monitoring and forest fires and all that stuff, this is certainly exciting for me because I'm able to put in market new technology, new partners, and expand on existing solution that we have. So very excited about that. I'm not a satellite guy, I'm a product guy.
Yeah, well, no. Everybody can play in this area. We'll come back to that. I've got more questions on the product strategy side. But Gianluca, satellite IoT, obviously, by its namesake, focuses in one particular area, but, well, predominantly in one particular area. But I want to get your thoughts overall as well in terms of what you're seeing in terms of the change factors in this last year.
Actually, what I will say is it all started in 2020, when we got into the 3GPP standard and we pushed to have the standard of terrestrial GSM extended also to satellite. Specifically now in the last years, I would say there's much more awareness. Awareness that it's a possibility and it exists, and even more now it's a reality. We've been launching our own satellites, and of course, other company also they have more satellites. We all proven that this is going to work. So there's a lot of awareness from the telecom operator. I remember when we started talking about it many years ago, it looked like something not possible, no? Something that, how can a normal device connect to the satellites? Well, now it's a reality. So that's probably the big step of the last 12 months.
Yeah, so I think, it's almost like seeing is believing. I mean, we talk about "can you hear me" as a phrase, but I think what you all seem to be saying is that whether it's the last 12 months or last 2 or 3 years, it's really that this has moved from something as a sort of science fiction topic to something that is very, very real. There's a lot of interest in how people look at the use cases, and we think about those, as I was talking about, between selling into consumers versus selling into business. And maybe I can start with the consumer side, and Tim, start with you actually on this. I think, how do you think about the satellite service offering into the consumers, and what do you think is most likely to fly there, and what is the role of a satellite company versus a telco operator in helping consumers see that benefit?
Well, I think, the role of a satellite operator when all of the consumers are effectively owned by the MNO is to extend the reach of an MNO's services to those customers that they're interested in serving. You illustrated in your introduction that it's kind of questionable as if people are really prepared to pay for this service yet. Iridium, we had a relationship with Qualcomm developing a direct-to-device strategy, and one of the things that is not really been proven yet in the industry is, are the customers prepared to pay? I think satellite companies, telcos, venture capitalists are prepared to invest more to see if we can create this new future. But bearing in mind, nobody is paying today for any direct-to-device capability. It's kind of an unproven thing. I just want to give one bit of experience from our industry, and particularly Iridium providing personal communications to customers. We've been doing that for quite a while. Customers are prepared to pay if they see value and if they have a need that isn't met by something else. Emergency communication for most of the regular consumers, probably not super compelling for them. Unlikely they're going to pay an explicit fee for that. But if they spend more time out of coverage, if they see the value because, friends and other industry use cases come up, then I think it could be something that could start to take a hold. So consumer, I think the jury's out a little bit, but there's clearly a lot of investment. Chris's company is a good example of companies that believe there is a market there to be made, and I think we've got more work to do to make it.
And Chris, we talked before this session, and it's interesting because AST is definitely a leader. It's definitely an innovator, and I think a lot of people are looking at the model you're using. How sticking on this topic of a consumer use case, if people can't tell when they're on a satellite network versus a terrestrial network, how do you shift perceptions among consumers that this is something, A, that is valuable, and B, that they will pay for, and how should we think about that over time?
Well, I'll start off with, obviously we truly believe there is a very sizable market here, and so do our customers, investors, partners. Bell is one of our investors. Vodafone, AT&T, Verizon, Rakuten, American Tower, Google. Just to name a few. So those are some pretty large companies that have very sizable customer base, and so that they believe in the technology. But part of this is that I agree there's no market unless it's accessible and affordable, and so it has to be something that's priced at market-based pricing. And so if we're offering this service in India, it's going to be a very different price than what we're offering in Canada. And so that's something we work very closely, and all of us need to work very closely with our MNO partners. We do not provide the service directly to the end user. We always go through our channel, which is the MNO. They own the customer. our customer is the MNO. So really, the value and how it's marketed, we leave that to the companies that really know how to do it and do it well. But we firmly believe if you can achieve a quality broadband speed at an affordable price, people are going to pay for it.
And I should say, I mean, part of the reason, I mean, obviously we believe there's a value to it. That's why we've shown the projections, and we see a lot of supply side activity in pursuit of that revenue chance, and I think that is definitely there. It's almost like playing the devil's advocate to make sure there's an airtight argument around how that product is positioned to people, and I think that's a good exercise to go to. Gianluca, we'll come to you in a minute on B2B, but first, Claude, I want to come back. I know you are more on the product side, but I'm interested in this concept of, how much operators see their network as a competitive differentiator, and how that has changed over time. And do you think in Canada that satellite, how does satellite play into the network strategy perspective from Bell?
So to anchor on what I do, I'm IoT product manager. I'm not a consumer, so I'm an enterprise, right? So they're a very successful IoT solution that we've launched. Obviously, resonate with Chris. Usually, the ROI has to fit to hit that hockey stick. We have partners, asset tracking, but if I just take asset tracking, there's a large portion of Canada that has no coverage whatsoever. So I'm have to leave on the table opportunities. And even if you go abroad, seaworthy, container, we do oil and gas. I mean, besides providing private network to cover those areas, there's a lot of opportunities. So for me, it's a valuable market to go after to unlock new use case. And I could resonate with I mentioned wildfires. It's not that it's a big business, but we're involved.
Yep.
There's no coverage.
Yep.
I mean, how do I detect, pretend, measure soil moisture with these asset tracker that we have? Yep. There's no network. So yeah, obviously it's key to our strategy.
It's a good segue because I do want to come on to the IoT story here. It wasn't always appreciated that was a part of the opportunity here, but I think, Gianluca, you know more than most that is definitely a part of the opportunity. And I guess I'm interested, and I think the audience is probably interested, how do you think about different industries and their demand for satellite connectivity? Where are you seeing the greatest potential right now, and do you see that changing over time?
Yeah, let me go back one moment to where we are coming from. I mean, we know that satellite connectivity has been there since a long time. At Satelio, what we think is that the service is not really a service that can be for all the world until this is available for all the use cases. This is affordable and this is largely used. Okay. If you go back to the 80s and we look at the mobile telephony, it existed, but it was not for everybody. And that's the standard that brought a phone on the pockets of everybody around the world. So that's what we want to do also on the satellite. So we're super focused on being extremely cost effective, very capex light. I'm saying all this because it's super important, the type of service we give, all of us, and at what price. Price is a key thing for the adoption. The price of the device, that as we know, probably is the first time in history that satellite operators are not getting into the market with their own hardware, but we're using the hardware that is already there in the different markets. And the pricing has to be really good enough for most of the use cases. That's the key differentiation on what is the IoT now and what should be done. So when we get into the use case, the industries, of course, much more are getting into this now because now it's much more affordable. We've seen a lot of logistics. Probably it's the number one in IoT. A lot of agriculture, livestock. Amazing. There's a lot of livestock, a lot of that want to be followed. Since we are an extension of coverage of the cellular, basically all the use cases that are now used in cellular can be extended. the most areas where this is happening are the countries where the coverage is not that good. The country is quite big, and the level of digitalization is high. So that's what we are seeing.
Yeah, and we'll come back to some of the industry. I mean, we see a lot happening in agriculture. We see a lot happening in trucking and fleet. We see a lot happening in energy, as we talked. I think each of those have a different monetization story, but the reality is there is a lot, and we know from our survey evidence and talking to buyers, people want this. And it's a question of how to do that. I'm interested in something you said at the end, though, around some of the geographic differences here. You know, here we are in the U.S. and in a very advanced market, as is the U.K. and much of Western Europe, but the largest addressable bases sit in India and Africa and parts of the developing world. And Chris, maybe I can come back to you here, because when you look at a global expansion, how do you navigate the different country differences? Maybe putting aside regulation for a minute, but just in terms of a demographic perspective and an economic perspective.
So it comes back to what I said earlier. It needs to be, in the developing nations, it needs to be a service that is accessible and affordable. Otherwise, it's not going to work. I agree with what Tim said, that it has to be priced properly. But it has to be at market-based pricing, because India is probably the lowest ARPU market in the world. All of us have to have a cost base that can be competitive in that extremely large market. And it goes, at least in our case, it goes back to developing the right products with our MNO partners, and because they know the markets better than we do, and we can't be arrogant enough to say that we know every single market in the world, and this is how it has to be, how the product needs to be developed, how it needs to be priced, other than it needs to be affordable so that we can have the highest adoption rate possible. But taking the lead from the MNO partners and how what's the best way to address the market. But the developing countries for direct-to-device by far is where the largest impact is. And I will just touch on, from a regulatory standpoint, that's where they are the early adopters. They are not putting up any roadblocks for enabling this service to be offered in their country. They want it there, and they see the value in extending or connecting the unconnected rather than creating regulatory bureaucratic roadblocks.
Yeah, that's well said. Tim, do you want to chime in on that one?
Vertical markets and applications.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, IoT for Iridium is one of our most important aspects of our business. It's driven more growth in the last 10 years than anything else we do. And bearing in mind we didn't really do any 15 or 18 years ago, you can see how important it is, even in a proprietary satellite world, which is where we've been for that period of time. What's going to happen now with NTN and standards-based technology is you dramatically lower the barrier for all sorts of use cases. But I still believe that in satellite, and most satellite operators that offer service, they will still be at a premium to terrestrial. Maybe unlike the D2D use case. In the IoT market, I think you'll find people will be looking for that premium where we can, encourage those applications that really need to have that coverage and capability. I think over time it will certainly change. It's why I believe that things like agriculture, I think, is, maybe in North America and Brazil, but in most of the rest of the world, it won't be a heavy use case for some period of time. Oil and gas, for sure. It already is today. I mean, oil and gas companies use satellite extensively, and they'll continue and they'll leverage that new cost point. One area where I think we haven't talked about is something like automotive. When we first started our NTN journey, we weren't really sure if NTN was going to be something that the automotive world was keen on. Very slow, very laborious, very expensive to get certified and in. But we've been really surprised by the feedback. Even for more limited capability, the ability to connect that vehicle, no matter what, no matter where, is something that that industry will pay for. It's going to take time to develop, but I think that will be one that you'll see NTN solutions coming to market for.
And before I come back to Claude, can you just, like, with the automotive example, how does the business model work there in terms of how they are they bundling this in as a premium service on top of the auto sale, or how does it work?
Yes, in some cases. I mean, there was a time when telematics in consumer auto was a premium paid for thing. If you remember, 20 years ago, you could buy a Mercedes and pay something extra to get that connectivity. Today, it's becoming the table stakes, even for low-value vehicles. And in another 10 years, it will be unheard of to not have a connection into the vehicle for some purpose. The question is, what purpose? Are you doing firmware updates? Are you doing media to the back of the car? Are you doing airbag alerts or e-call, that kind of thing? So I think the continued extension of this will penetrate automotive, fleet for sure. I mean, fleet management in the US was the first market for satellite IoT. Omnitrax did that 30 years ago. So I think you'll see that be one of the markets that may be slow to develop, but will rapidly get there once they get over the burden of development.
Claude, you want to chime in from the Canadian perspective? We're as an IoT specialist, what you talked about forestry before, but what industries do you think hold the greatest potential here?
I wouldn't say it's industry. So when we're talking about IoT products in Canada, it's the ability for us to support our partner manufacturers. So some of the topics here that we're talking about is creating the ultimate one SKU that fits anywhere, right? From a SIM management perspective, profile the nation. And when we're talking about connectivity, it's the same thing, right? So if we do have Canadian enterprises that are making great product in asset, tank monitoring, whatever the vertical is, as a carrier, we want to support them to export. So having the ability to put everything into one box and giving them a pathway to resonate around the world, that's, for me, that's product management perspective. It's not taking something that already exists and putting into our channel. It's basically helping our partners export outside Canada, even for Bell to actually export these products out. Because previously, we need to actually refer them to somebody else and so on and so forth. So that's the value for me in this thing.
Cool. We got about 12 or 13 minutes left. We've talked about the momentum and what's been catalyzing that. We've talked about some of the use cases between consumer and B2B, and we've talked about some of the revenue models. I want to look ahead to the future now and look at sort of the commercialization timelines for a lot of the partnerships that we're seeing. And because I think a lot of people will want to know, and you see there's such huge interest in this topic, when will this service be available and what governs that? And Chris, maybe I can come to you. I mean, again, AST has been such an active player in this, and can you speak to the roadmap, not just for AST, but more broadly of how these services get rolled out and to a point of commercialization? Are we talking a year, 2 years, 3 years? How should we think about that?
Well, it depends on what level of service you want. If you want a service that is equivalent to always available, always on, like what we have with the terrestrial networks, it's going to be 12 to 18 months from now. However, with any of the LEO operators, there's a difference between coverage and persistence. So with the 5 satellites that we just launched, as an example, we can provide coverage everywhere, plus minus 55 degrees, but the persistence, it's only for a handful of minutes a day. So we need to launch more satellites. We require 96 satellites for basically near global coverage. The MNOs have been very clear that in order for them to bring a product specifically to the consumer market, they need to have a near 100% persistence. There are other applications, IoT, what we spoke a lot about. There's certain applications with that where it does not require 100% persistence. We could even do asset tracking with our 5 satellites. But where, at least in our case, the early adopters is US DoD, US government, where there are certain applications that our satellites, based on their size, it scratches a very a big itch for them. So that's where we're seeing that we're going to be generating our first revenue will be with government. But as we add more satellites, the persistence goes up, and then there's more and more services that the MNOs will be able to offer.
Gianluca, do you want to give your perspective on that in terms of the commercialization timelines?
Well, we are, well, it's quite similar, just the size of the satellites is quite different. We also launched our 6 satellites. We are going to be commercial at the beginning of next year, so it's just a few months away. We have coverage everywhere on the planet, even on the North Pole, because our satellites are polar orbits. The persistence or the time that you can have the connectivity is a few times per day, so it's quite similar. And that's nice to start with that because you have already a lot of applications that do not require real time. Okay, so you can monetize your investment while you're building the rest of the constellation. The take-up will be probably always slower than what we think. Okay. It's going to take many quarters to the final customers to integrate this new technology, to do the deployments, and to make it meaningful revenues. This we are aware, but I think it's a wave that it's already launched and there's no way back. Yep. And this aspect of having in the same device, again, cellular and out of cellular and not terrestrial connectivity together, it's going to be something that it's like what we have of Wi-Fi and GSM on our phone. So that's ongoing. Yeah,
no, it definitely has that feel of something where this is here to stay. I mean, linked to that, and there's a question I want to ask all of you before we close in 5 or 6 minutes, but it is the question of ROI. And Tim, I wonder, like, from your perspective, how do you think, if you're launching a new constellation now or new capacity, how do you think about the ROI for this? Is it, do you think 5, 10, 15-year horizons, or can we think on a more kind of near-term basis?
You probably should ask these guys that because we already have our satellites in orbit. So, and the good news is they're bought and paid for.
Well, I want to hear from experience.
But yeah, I mean, 2 things that satellite and in my case IoT have in common is it's not for the faint of heart. Yeah. Satellite capital cycles investment are long, risky, and there's no guarantee that you're going to find the customers there at the end of that journey. So. I think it varies. I think, Chris and AST, I won't necessarily speak for you, but I think that their ambitious plan is probably a little bit more risky. Gianluca's with small sats, a lot easier to fund and get moving. I would say from an IoT perspective, because that's one of our key markets, it's really all about market adoption and finding the customers and the ROI use cases for them. I mean, we can worry about our own ROI as a satellite operator, but we spend most of our time worrying about, are we making sense for the customer? Yep. Is the customer seeing the value in what we're providing? Connecting their application, their employees, their enterprise, 100% of the time is what we're all trying to aim for. And that's got value for almost all industry, almost all government, and probably a lot of consumers. So I think we're going to see the next year or two be very exciting. Our network will be updated for NTN by the end of next year. We have our first device partner, Nordic Semiconductor, that we announced this week, and we expect to be in the market with a fully global network then.
Claude, from Bell's perspective, I mean, what type of success indicators do you look at for IoT or the broader network in terms of pairing NTN with that service? How do you judge success over time?
It's all about volume, right? So, I mean, the satellite business has been there forever. In the IoT market that we're good for, it's all about volume. So if I sign a customer, he's got 50,000 deployment and his 5,000 are outside of coverage, I'm able now to respond to this RFP versus having 2 competitive products to fulfill that RFP. So me, it's about quantity.
Cool. We got 5 minutes left, and I want to give you each a chance. You know, sticking with the outlook theme of towards the latter part of this panel. I mean, there's so much happening. There's a great chance we're going to be back here in 12 months' time, asking the similar questions of what's changed, what hasn't changed, what should we be thinking about. Simple question. I mean, for each of you, what are you most excited about, and secondly, what worries you most in terms of where this goes? And you can talk about technology, you can talk about business, you can talk about regulation, whatever you want. But what most excites you and what worries you most? Maybe, Claude, we can start with you.
I don't get worried to begin with. I get excited about, like I said, the unlocking a new opportunity, being able to explore new solutions and expand with our partner. I think for me, if these guys deliver, I'm really happy.
Oh, you heard it here. Chris?
It's definitely the extending the broadband, the 4G, 5G coverage into areas that don't exist today, so that all of us have been in areas that are unconnected and offering it at an affordable rate. What is, you know, Tim was spot on, is that you know, we've raised a lot of money. Space is not easy. It's very expensive. And we need to continue to build our satellites, launch our satellites, and be very, very efficient. If we do that, we will be successful. So, but you know, still a lot of wood for us to chop. But we have a lot of success so far in our 7 years existence. So I think, and the other worry, regulatory is always a worry.
Right. No, fair enough. We've always got to be mindful of that. Gianluca?
I mean, it's quite obvious. Look, we started 6 years ago, so we were the one that actually went into the 3GPP. We are the biggest contributor to the Release 17 for the satellite industry. There were basically no new space company on the 3GPP at that time. We were the only one thinking and dreaming about it. And now it's a reality. So what we've seen and we are excited about is to make it working in reality and commercially available and connect to the customers and be everybody happy. The worries are regulatory. Are we worried about regulatory? It's a challenge for sure. We've been seeing a lot of nice responses from the regulatory entities around the world, not necessarily in all the countries, but in general they see it as a very nice way of adopting a new technology, a way of pushing the digitization of the country. And the fact that you go there and you don't go directly to the final customer, but you go through in the telecom operator is also much better seen than that you go there and you just take out the revenue out of the country. So very excited what's happening.
Tim, do you want to take us home with this one?
Sure, yeah. I mean, like the rest of the guys, I think we're excited for the future. We're excited to see what this new innovation brings to the industry at large. I mean, I think it's going to be a rising tide that sort of lifts all boats. You know, some of us may be higher than others, but I can't remember the last time we were creating, a brand new convergence of technologies to create new markets like this, either in the satellite or in the mobility world. I mean, in mobility, it seems like it's been speed, and coverage is kind of where it is. This gives the opportunity for that to change completely, and for the two industries, I think, to really start finding more ways to innovate together. The only thing I'm worried about is not moving fast enough, and that's kind of the same problem we all have.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Guys, thanks so much for coming up here and being on the panel. We do have another panel to come after our next keynote speaker, but I really want to thank you for being up here, and it's your insights are hugely valued, and I think everybody here will have valued them as well. So let's give a round to our panel.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. As Tim said, my name is Brian Aziz, and I'm the Vice President of Global Sales at Iridium. But I've spent the last 18 months or so really looking after our strategic collaborations and partnerships around our NTN program, and really trying to develop those partnerships as we go. So I promise that I will not PowerPoint you to death. I got a lot of images, except for this. There's a lot of text here. Just ignore that. But I thought we'd start off by agreeing on a couple of things, because I think the theme here about NTN and the convergence of terrestrial networks and satellite networks is something of a historic opportunity. I think we can all agree that that is the case. And there are lots of companies that are trying to answer the call and figure out how to get into the opportunity, how to take advantage of this convergence. And we see that with the attendance here, with the big names that are entering the space like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. And it's interesting. It's a fun time to be in the industry. I think we can also agree that when you consider direct-to-device, which is something a little closer to home as we talk about some of the topics here today, we can agree that providing ubiquitous coverage is an important capability, right? I think it's even more so important as you think about the events that are happening this week in the southeastern part of the United States with the hurricanes and the ability to provide those consumers the emergency SOS, or the ability to text a loved one or to check in or get rescue services. These are really important things. And as an industry, I think it goes beyond just making money. It's a good thing for humanity, right? That we use the capabilities and the technologies that we've developed to provide this type of service. But I also think we can probably agree that there are a lot of questions to be answered, right? How do you monetize it? How do you get through the regulatory challenges? How do you really provide a capability that justifies the costs, right? I don't think anyone has particularly put all the pieces of the puzzle together. Everyone's really trying. Some people are guessing. Some are going to get there sooner than others, but no one's figured it out yet. So I think with a nod, like nod your heads, you agree? Is that where we are right now? Okay, good. But I am a sales guy, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about Iridium. Okay, but then I'll give you some perspective on how we look at the market, what we believe the opportunity is, and the different approaches, right? So I'm gonna give you a bit of insight on Iridium. You saw my colleague Tim on the panel here earlier. We have been around for a long time. We've got a 25-year history in the satellite communication space. We've got t-shirts that say we're the OG LEO, the original gangster LEO. So Iridium made LEO cool. At least I think so, before LEO was cool. Before Elon came around and said LEO, 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 Iridium was already in that space. And even though the industry is getting a lot of buzz, Iridium's been providing critical services over our network for those 25 years. So just to give you a little bit of insight into what some of those services are, and I'll go through this pretty quickly, but if you consider maritime, Iridium is only one of 2 satellite operators that can provide GMDSS, Global Maritime Distress Safety System, over our network, which is not an easy thing to get. But because of the reliability of our network and our history in this space, we've been able to be one of the satellite operators that's in that space. Aviation, cockpit safety services, right? Air traffic control uses Iridium, or the airlines and various aviation platforms use Iridium to ensure that there's connectivity on aircraft. Personal communications, I said we were the OG of LEO. In my mind, personal communications is the original direct-to-device, right? Our network has been the backbone to consumer devices through our leading partners, ecosystem partners that develop devices that go into consumers' hands, providing things like emergency SOS, two-way messaging, location tracking, most recently sending pictures and voice notes. These are things that we've been doing for quite a long time, so it's not necessarily new to us. As well as IoT. You heard Tim talk about Iridium and our place in IoT. We really do consider ourselves the leaders when it comes to satellite IoT. Our network, again, has been a backbone connecting assets in fields like transportation, agriculture, oil and gas, connecting devices and sending critical data back and forth in the most remote locations of the world. So NTN is not new to us. It's a new convergence. It's a larger opportunity. We're really excited to be a part of this opportunity, really excited to be working alongside industry partners and MNOs and hardware developers to expand the Iridium capability and kind of cast a wider net to address broader use cases. So that was some of the sales stuff. I'm going to ask some thought-provoking questions. This is a chaotic image. I'm not really sure if you could see it from all the way back there. But what you see here is Earth surrounded by a bazillion, quadrillion satellites. It's nuts. And there's a lot of satellites that are trying to be launched. There's a lot going on in this space. There's a lot of buzz. But what I'm trying to say here is that choosing the right satellite network matters. Choosing the right partner matters. Everyone that's looking to get involved in this space is going to make an investment. And you need to make sure that you're partnering with the right potential satellite operator to ensure that your investment actually goes somewhere and gets you the business opportunity that you're looking to do this. So why does it matter? Because there's a lot of challenges. I mean, again, you heard the panel say that space is hard, space is expensive, things almost never happen on time or when they were originally planned to happen. And these are things that we live and breathe every day. We know how it is to operate a satellite network. So many of the companies entering this space are facing tough challenges. Some are underfunded. Frankly, some might have unrealistic business plans, and there's a lot of questions to be answered. And again, a topic that came up during the panel was, what will the performance be like when these things are finally up and running? Will it meet the consumer, the everyday consumer's expectations, right? We're living in a world where you take your cell phone out, you load up a website, and it's there in seconds. We're willing to pay for that because it's on-demand service. But will we be able to meet that same type of performance as we get into these more consumer-based use cases? They may not be willing to pay for 2G, 3G experience and pay a premium to be connected for that type of service. We believe they will be willing to pay for things like emergency SOS, or MNOs might be willing to provide that as a safety service for their consumers. We believe that there's an opportunity for two-way messaging and the ability to check in with a loved one on demand as needed. The ability to track someone on a map platform like Google Maps. Those are things that we think, okay, this makes sense. Most of the time consumers are inside terrestrial coverage, so when they really need it, they'll be willing to step in and pay for it. So that's going to shape really the size of this opportunity, right? How much the consumer is willing to pay for it and how we monetize the business overall. The other challenge is spectrum and regulatory. Spectrum is a finite resource, right? Everyone is after it. Everyone's trying to get their hands on it. We happen to be fortunate enough to have globally allocated spectrum when we're able to operate pole to pole, but these are some of the complexities that are going to change the coverage and how often the service is available. I also don't think that consumers are going to be willing to pay for a service that's only available a few times a day. It just doesn't make sense. It needs to be persistent, always on, always available service. So some of these things we've navigated as a company over the last 25 years, and we've learned a lot of lessons along the way. We feel like we're in a good place now where we've figured out how to cater to the satellite use cases, and we really think that our network is one of the ones you might be interested in potentially partnering with. We've got a strong foundation in this space over the last 2 decades. We've got a strong, fully operational network. So we're not looking to launch a new constellation to bring this service online. It's already in space. It's operating today. And we think that our experience gives us the ability to cater to this newly converged space of terrestrial and non-terrestrial markets. So we've been we've got the foundational elements in terms of the spectrum, the network. This is not something that needs to be funded or we're looking for outside funding to make it happen. We've got it all, the pieces together, and I'm really happy to share that, and Tim mentioned it, I think, that we have had our work items accepted as part of Release 19 by 3GPP, which is a major milestone. And earlier today, we announced a strategic collaboration with Nordic Semiconductor. So we are well underway, and we're really excited for what the next few years look like. So So there's two approaches, right? And Tim mentioned it in his opening. We like to call the SCS model and the MSS model, right? Supplemental coverage from space versus the MSS model, which is what Iridium is focused on. From our view, SCS really focuses on carrier dead zones, right? So a satellite operator that is operating an SCS service, you know, I'm using that phrase to call out to name the service, is going to operate within the carrier's spectrum footprint, right? So really focusing on carrier dead zones, right? Makes sense. You're driving your car through the valley, you have a tire blowout, but you're still inside the allocated kind of footprint of where that carrier can operate. You can open up your phone and get the services you need. MSS is going to be able to give you, at least Iridium's offering, a completely global coverage for this service. So again, we're going to be focusing on key elements of services, kind of the backbone of Iridium in terms of emergency SOS, SMS, and IoT is a huge opportunity that we already obviously play in today. But we don't think it's a winner-take-all approach. I think both approaches will coexist, but we really like to think of ourselves as the glue, being able to operate over the seas, in other areas, in areas where some MNOs may not have the spectrum to share, right? Because spectrum, again, is an expensive resource, and they may be looking for other opportunities to help their users have ubiquitous coverage. Okay, so I gave you some more industry stuff, market stuff, but let's look at what Iridium is bringing to market. We are launching a service called Iridium NTN Direct. So we're bringing a standards-based direct-to-device and IoT solution to the market. In fact, we've been working very hard on this over the last year, and we have been able to really kind of push through a lot of the really difficult things when you're first getting started with a standards-based offering. I mentioned the approval into 3GPP Release 19, our collaboration with Nordic Semiconductor, and we're still collaborating with many other industry partners because there is an interest in having a truly global LEO-based offering. So we're excited that we're able to bring this to market and accelerate our path by collaborating with some of these industry leaders. But why? Why Iridium? What makes Iridium different from these others, right? I mentioned the truly global coverage, but that does matter, right? There's going to be a need to operate in areas that are very, very remote, where a mobile network operator spectrum footprint may not be shared. There's going to be use cases in areas that consumers do travel into, and it's important to have that global coverage. Licensed spectrum, it is not easy. You can't just look at a map, pick a country, and say, I'm going to operate there. It took years and years of work with various regulatory bodies to be able to get that ability to operate in various countries. We've got a history of outstanding performance. We've been operating these types of services that I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation for a long time. But there's a reason why various militaries and airlines and the maritime industry rely on a network like Iridium, because it's proven that it has the performance and the ability to be reliable and always on. The last thing is, we're not going anywhere. We've been around for 25 years. We're not out trying to raise funds to get this off the ground. We are financially healthy, and we are laser focused on bringing this capability to market. So, looking at the future, where does that leave us? We are excited for what's ahead. We're working closely with some of the partners that I had mentioned. It will be a truly global coverage capability from day one. And although we may not be first to market, we are laser focused on being the best. That is our intention. So the demand for reliable global connectivity is only increasing, and we're ready to meet that demand head on. We look forward to growing this ecosystem, and we invite partners within the mobile ecosystem that are interested in working with Iridium to reach out. We've got multiple people from our team here, and we'd certainly like to have discussions. And we'll be around after this to answer any questions you may have. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Okay, we are going to move to our final panel because there's so much to talk about, and we want to get into more detail around the discussion we were having on the first panel. So we're gonna do that, and this one is going to focus more on sort of bringing insights out from the deployments we've seen and the case studies we've seen, and then looking to the future around the innovation pipeline and how we see that feeding in. So really excited to kick that off. And so here are the speakers that are going to be joining us. And if I can welcome them from various parts of the arena, wherever they are. Mr. Parth Trivedi from Skylo, Alban Hoxha from Beware, Dave Roscoe from Orbcomm, and once again, Sami Yameni from Viavi. Come on up, guys. Well, guys, as I said to the folks who joined me on stage for the first panel, thank you very much for making time and coming up, because you guys are leaders, and everybody will want to hear your insights. As I sort of preambled this panel, I think what we want to do is build on the discussion we had in the first and really look around the innovation cycles about where we are going to go next with satellite technology and how that filters into the use cases. We're going to talk about AI. We're going to talk about innovation in the network equipment. And I think we want to understand a little bit more on the business models that are at play here. So we got 35 minutes for the discussion, just like the first. But maybe if I can start, before we get into the questions, just some brief introductions, just 1 minute tops for each of you guys around how, Sami, I know you've already done that, but for our other panelists, to sort of introduce yourself and your company and how you fit into this space. And Parth, maybe I can start with you.
Thank you so much for having me on the panel, and pleasure to be here. I'm Parth Trivedi, CEO, co-founder of Skylo. We are a global direct-to-device service operator that connects cellular devices directly over satellite so that our customers never lose coverage. We're live across 4 continents commercially, more than 50 million square kilometers of coverage, and we're really excited by all of the partnerships that we're bringing to the table. And commercializing NTN direct-to-device in the most expansive way possible.
Excellent. Dave.
Thanks, Tim. So I'm Dave Roscoe. I'm EVP and General Manager of our Satellite IoT division within Orbcomm. Orbcomm's been is basically a pioneer in the satellite IoT industry, launching a dedicated satellite IoT constellation 30 years ago. And Orbcomm as a company, we've evolved from just being a provider of connectivity to complete end-to-end solutions for IoT applications. And unique with Orbcomm, historically, legacy, we're satellite-based, but we're also an MVNO. We have 7 partnerships with Tier 1 cellular providers like AT&T or T-Mobile, Telefonica. So we offer global connectivity network services, both cellular and satellite, for our end customers.
Thank you, Dave. Alban?
Alban Hoxha here. So I represent Beware. We're a Canadian company in asset tracking management systems. We have been in the industry for about 7 to 8 years. We embarked the low power wide area network technologies since day one. And here we are, 7, 8 years later, we have deployed about 350,000 low power wide area IoT sensors in North America primarily. And one of the things that we did from day one is to create partnership with GSMA, understanding the 3GPP releases, and working really closely to provide the ROI and the use cases for our customers. Our goal and our vision is to provide low-cost hardware, low-cost data plans, and low-cost services, so we can scale the deployments of all the technologies that we're talking about here. NTN is like a deja vu experience for us now. It's a fully developed, from what we understand, it's a fully developed 3GPP provisioning layer, and we are very excited actually to be part of this program, and as a result, we created a partnership with the GSMA Foundry, and we would like to move forward and deliver on that.
Excellent. Sammy, maybe just quick for yourself. I know most people probably heard your opening remarks, but just quickly from Viavi as well.
Yeah, so we are, as I mentioned, we are mainly test and measurement company. We do a lot of testing, providing lab capabilities, use case verification, certification in case of the terrestrial network. But also, more and more recently, we are seeing that providing a test bed for innovation. I think that's a key point. We talked about innovation, and we talked about some of the challenges we're looking at, and we always believe that sometimes the best idea is the one that we don't know yet, right? And if you open up a lot of your platforms to be able to test these kind of scenarios, think about how can we improve, coverage in terms of persistence. I mean, that was the question always there. I mean, as for enabling and inciting these kind of innovation in research facilities, in different companies, in small startups. I mean, that's we believe that's reducing the barrier to entry for them in terms of actually testing these complex scenarios is going to be key to take this industry to the next step.
Let's start. I mean, I asked the panelists on the first panel around the last 12 months and what has changed. And I think that's a good place to start here as well. But maybe if I can be take a slightly different angle on that question. And Parth, I'll start with you on this. I mean, you were here last year speaking at our summit, and it's probably even bigger this year. The interest has grown so much. What do you think in terms of some of the technical innovation and the performance innovation in satellites? What has changed in the last 12 months? Where are you seeing the biggest gains?
I think, Tim, the question you're really asking is, how quickly has satellite become a part of our everyday experiences in the past 12 months? And if you think about it, it's now a capability that is available inside your phone, inside some of the largest OEMs on the planet who have come out. I'm speaking generally about the industry, who have come out with this capability. If you haven't tried it out, I'd encourage you to go to demo mode on either the iPhone or the Pixel and test it out. I think that's remarkable on how far along the industry's come in putting satellite connectivity in your pocket. And some people may have it, may not even know it, that they have a satellite phone in their pocket. So the first step that the industry took was, how can we make that first interaction that someone has over a satellite network be a reliable one? Because the reason it's going to be used will be an important one for them, like what we're seeing happen with the very unfortunate hurricane right now, where people are actually benefiting from having this service in their pocket. That's what's happened in the past 12 months, is we have witnessed people's lives being saved and therefore changed as a result of having this capability in the device. And I think that's important. We often try and think about what are the next 100 use cases, but actually unlocking that in a reliable way across millions of people and devices, that's super important. We've come a long way.
Yeah. No, that's well said. And the hurricane and the awful situation that brings is a very, very touchstone example. I think a lot of people can relate to in practice. Dave, from Orvcom's perspective, I mean, how do you think about the biggest changes the last 12 months from what you guys have been doing?
So, first of all, I agree with Parth in terms of the integration or the announcement that Apple first did. Yep. That created a buzz in this industry that I haven't seen in a long time, right? And when you look at the evolution of the satellites themselves and their capabilities, right? And Orvcom is a multi. I'll call us a multi-satellite network operator. So we have a very long partnership with Viasat, and we have our own networks that we operate on the geostationary constellation that's owned and operated by Viasat. And we actually just launched our new generation, next generation satellite IoT network called OGX this summer. We rolled it out, right? And what's unique with that network is that we capitalized on the satellite capabilities of like the new I-6 satellite. So when you have more power or more capabilities within the satellite, you've got the option of decision as you design your network is that you're basically getting more link budget, which means that you can push out messages faster, larger messages, or you can do a trade-off and take that link budget and apply it to the device that's on the ground so you can drive cost out of the device, right? And that's what we've been able to do is that we've been able to optimize that low end and introduce a very low cost satellite solar tracker. And then also we're able to optimize our higher end data delivery so that we could expand the type of applications that we're doing now with satellite IoT. So, and I think it's also constant innovation is what's required, and investments in chipsets, driving cost out, because from my perspective, satellite's been around for 30 years. It's very reliable service. The devices are rock solid in the field, but 10 years ago, you talk about putting satellite into your solution, and everyone's like cringes because it's unaffordable. But we are now at the point, to circle back, is that we're on the cusp of affordability, right? And as soon as you're there, you're going to hit that knee in the curve where you're going to get adoption.
Again, I agree. And when we think about, in the intro remarks, I talked about the coverage gap standing at about 7% of the world. But if you look back, the global internet population still only about 60% of pop. And there's a usage gap beyond the coverage gap that holds things back, and that usage gap gets to affordability. So you're absolutely right to bring that up, and I think we'll come back to that question when we get into business models. Sammy, maybe I can come to you on this question, though. I mean, as a testing provider, you have a purview across many different satellite groups. Where have you seen, you talked about digital twins and AI. Can you elaborate on that, and where are we seeing the greatest places of innovation?
Yeah, so I think we heard it from everybody on this panel, the last panel. I think yes, we need coverage everywhere, especially when we don't have coverage. But the reality is, where we're going to see the ROI coming and where we're seeing the maturity happen is in this use case, right? The IoT use cases, the different vertical application, right? Now, again, we come more from the terrestrial part. We have been there for a long time. I mean, even this vertical application didn't come to the wireless until recently. I mean, that's one of the promise of 5G, that you're going to start seeing new innovations in industrial applications, in IoT application, more densification. I mean, we're talking about some sites where you have 500,000 IoT devices has to be functioning in this site. Now, one thing we see from our side, and where we see the NTN, what we're very excited about NTN, and I know that every satellite provider has their own vision, but what we're seeing is that even the vertical applications in the terrestrial network, I believe they require to have an NTN, because one of the main characteristics of some of these applications is 100% continuous coverage, which means if anything happens, disaster or anything, this IoT has to function for specific application. Some of these very mission critical IoT, very critical mission critical verticals will require always connectivity. So it's not looking at NTN as an extension just to add more use cases. To actually make the current use cases more reliable, more mature, will require an extension with the NTN. And this is what we're trying to look at, is how you'll be able to realize these kind of innovation in these verticals, and how you build these scenarios and innovate in these scenarios and build a test bed for us from our side to see that. Also multi-satellite communication as well. The idea is that we're going to always be connected to one, we were seeing a lot of satellites out there, a lot of capabilities, and you may have to at some point rely on more than just one. I like the idea, no winner takes all, because each one will have a different characteristics. I mean, think about application that can benefit from all of that at the same time. Again, complexity is there. That's what, from our point of view, the testing is going to be required now. We're happy with that. But again, this is kind of innovation that we're looking at.
Yeah, and we're going to come to the device makers, and we talk about Apple. I want to come back to that because they're an important part of the story. But Albin, if I can come to you as well, I mean, just rounding us out on some of the innovation that you've seen. I mean, from your perspective, again, you bring a different perspective here. What are you seeing as the biggest sort of growth and innovation, and what would you like to highlight here around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I can bring a little bit back, some of the panelists, they said earlier that ROI is one of the critical factors, for NTN as a new technology. And the second highlight is the complexity of the technology, right? So as you can imagine, with every new technology, so there's a lot of challenges when you start building products around them, and especially bringing to the market. So there is a lot of complexity. There is a lot of work. Us as a developer, Beware as a developer and integrator, we deal with a lot of issues, from product introductions into the marketplace. But some of the things that we would like to do a little bit different from what we initially did for M1 introduction. We are targeting first ROI and do a lot of educational and learning and exposure, taking that NTN technology and exposing to our customers. We see a lot of value. We believe that NTN has the potential for the logistics industry to benefit from it. One of our deliverables, from the ROI point of view, partnering with GSMA Foundry, is a smart logistics white paper that we built together. We actually, as a matter of fact, we launched it today, so we're going to make it available to our wide global audience very soon. But it talks about 99% of the Canadian has internet, but actually 25% of the country is covered. So as you can see, there's a lot of opportunities out there, and especially dealing with mobility, handover. So there's a lot of complex issues. Then we believe there is a great opportunity to actually deliver the promise over NTN. Now, from the Beware point of view, there is some risk mitigations we have to take care. We are an M1 developer, so we'll still rely on that to help NTN, like firmware over the air upgrades and other features that are required over M1, and then still deliver a lot of functionalities over NTN.
All right, let's move on to the device side, because they are an important part of this equation in terms of how quickly satellite services are commercialized. We all know that with the 3GPP incorporation of NTN standards, that has opened up a very big addressable base for direct-to-device. But that ultimately doesn't matter unless the device makers incorporate the functionality into their portfolios. Parth, I mean, when you look ahead, when you think about Apple, you think about Samsung, you think about other major device makers, how do you think they're approaching incorporating satellite into their devices? Is this a matter of when rather than if? And how do you see that playing out over the next, say, 2-3 years?
Short answer is yes, it's a matter of when, not if. And we're already seeing that play out.
Yep.
The longer answer is it's not just whether the device maker decided to put it in or not. We're really talking about an ecosystem approach here. Just because to highlight this point, first of all, the decision starts with not the device, but the chip.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you've got to look at what is the addressable base and accessible base of chipsets that have this functionality built into it. And that's where we started. We did an insane amount of work with that ecosystem to start with. We worked with Qualcomm, Samsung, MediaTek, Sony, ensured that we were working with them not just with the standards, but with additional very pragmatic functionalities that had to be built in to control the user experience over this constrained link. Once we had done that, we moved on to modules. Once we did that, then we moved on to devices, but we did that in consort with the carriers, so that the experience that customers would have over familiar services would be consistent between their terrestrial and their satellite experience. And frankly, part of that ecosystem, as my friend here from Viavi was talking about, is also that certification ecosystem. Because device makers until now did not know how to get their devices certified for this new fourth mode of connectivity that's on your phone. And we did that. We worked with all the major test equipment vendors like Keysight and Rohde & Schwartz and Anritsu and all the major test houses, and ensured that the way you get certified for NTN is no different than the way you get certified for cellular. So all of that work, which kind of belies the single decision that an OEM has to make, was leading up to OEMs now making that decision and incorporating Skylo in their products.
I think, do you want to chime in on that?
I want to add one thing. I completely agree, and I think certification is an important piece. But let's also be clear about one major thing. The device manufacturers today, Apple and all of these guys, they already have some of these technologies in their device, and yet they are reluctant still to make it completely available or, advertise that you can have to do that. And there is a reason for that. I mean, one is that if you say, well, I have satellite communication and I'm using this on an Apple or a Pixel, and yet I have a very lousy service, it doesn't reflect good on the device themselves. So there is a big problem here, is that while they are looking at that, there is a lot still of challenges in making sure that these services, specifically when it comes to consumer, maybe IoT is a little bit different, but when it comes to consumer, it's going to meet the criteria that make this consumer feeling, okay, my device, I like it, I'm not going to blame Apple or Samsung for that. That's one item. And I also think about, what I agree with certification, I think we need to take it beyond certification. I mean, we need to take it to the point where it is this complex scenario. That's why I like the idea of, having this test bed that is always categorizing different use cases, different scenarios, different ideas for where you are with different operators. So I want to take it beyond just certification.
Albin, do you want to chime in on this device question? I mean, how do you see the OEM landscape and the chip, as Parth said, the chip maker landscape incorporating satellite over the coming years? How should we think about the pace of that?
Well, there is, obviously it's a new technology, and there is a lot of, everybody is trying to be careful on what they're trying to commit and what they're trying to deliver. Us as a developer and integrator, we're very impacted from, from that delivery point of view. So we do a lot of hard work to talk to everybody, like to talk to Qualcomm and to talk to Telit and Quectel and chip makers and module makers, and trying to understand what's their roadmap with respect to NTN and what are their milestones. Are we aligned with their roadmaps? And quite often, we do we provide our feedback, right? We bring the customer's feedback into the opportunity, and we do everything we can to actually to get those roadmap in front. And we have to be very transparent with the customers too, right? So we can't just paint a story and tell them things that they are coming, but they're not coming. But there is an excitement, and we do see engagement. As a matter of fact, today, Beware had a few meetings with different partners, and we do have some concrete deliverables for the next 6 months. From the IoT perspective, we are trying to deliver the low power deliverables, so optimized for power, optimized for low bandwidth, and that's our immediate focus. So there is desire to deliver on it for sure.
Dave, I think there's a lot of interest, you know, part of this discussion and interest from the telco perspective is around measuring their TCO and how to improve economics over time. You talked about some of the gains in your opening remarks on that front. I wonder if you can expand on that. I mean, from Orbcomm's perspective, how are you bringing the satellite service costs down, and how do you think those can be further brought down in the coming years?
So I think one of the big issue, or not issue, but one of the big things that everyone's talking about is terrestrial convergence, right? And that has actually been Orbcomm's playbook for the last 10 years, right? And that's why we're an MVNO. So we provide products and services that integrate satellite and terrestrial, right? And by doing that, you can optimize, not only do you get the reliability and ubiquitous coverage, but you optimize the cost, right? You know, least cost routing that you can implement and whatnot. So that in itself is one of the kind of the playbooks that Orbcomm has. And then we've also, when you're talking about the chips or the modules, and it's not just a question of when, it's also a question of what, right? Because when you look at, direct-to-device, awesome for consumer type of applications, but if you're in a hardcore industrial satellite IoT application, there's a bunch of features and functionality that network has to support in order to execute on that application, right? And so at that point, you have to go to higher levels of integration to drive costs down, to make it more affordable. And you know, one example that we partnered with u-blox, who's a manufacturer of cellular modems, right? And we're developing a software-defined module, software-defined radio, where one module you can switch between cellular and satellite, right? So now, as you do that level of integration, you're driving costs down, and so the devices are going to become more cost-effective.
Yeah, thank you for that. We've got about 5 or 10 minutes left in this panel before our final keynote speaker from Ericsson. But again, I wanted to sort of just pivot the discussion a little bit to look to the future, and because there is so much dynamism going on here. We get asked a lot from very, very big global technology companies that I won't name here, but around this concept of a 5G network in the sky. And a lot of there is a little bit of, there's substance to that and there's marketing to that, in that technically the standards in 3GPP now mean that this is 5G NTN service, and so we can call that. But in reality, what a consumer or a business gets is not a 5G service now. And we are asked the question of, you know, hey Tim, or hey guys, like, can we ever get satellite service so that it's not just providing 3 or 4 megabits per second, but is providing 30? Or can we get up to 100, you know, hypothetically? And I'm interested in your thoughts on that, and you don't need to be scientific about it, but does this get to a point where we are talking about parity with LTE speeds or 5G speeds? And if so, kind of what drives that change over the next sort of 3 to 5 years? Parth, maybe I can start with you.
Maybe I'll add one extra dimension to this, which is, rather than talking about bandwidth, what if we spoke about application?
Sure, please.
And what if the current set of applications that we're familiar with could be enabled with much less bandwidth? Then we would be talking about, hey, here's what we're enabling while still maintaining a constrained amount of spectrum. Because frankly, the bottleneck for this entire industry, irrespective of who you talk about, is going to be spectrum and satellite power. Those are the fundamental physics limitations that are going to be imposed on the system, which frankly is going to prevent it from being as high speed or high throughput as 5G terrestrially, for the same reasons that 5G terrestrially and wirelessly is not going to be as high throughput as fiber. So when we think about it that way, at Skylo, we like to think about maximizing the capabilities of the protocols, for instance, that we run on. How can we run voice, as an example, using the narrowband NTN protocol? That's something fundamentally that we've unlocked, allowing you to have a very high quality experience using voice with, frankly, a level of bandwidth that you wouldn't have thought would be applicable for this particular use case in the past. So I see that dimension or that aspect of it being critically important. And then, of course, we can talk about how we unlock more spectrum and unlock greater efficiencies in the existing NTN protocols at the 3GPP for more services. But there will always be a trade-off that we have to carefully consider around consumer willingness to pay, carrier willingness to pay and adopt for additional incremental bandwidth versus what's realistic.
Yeah, no, I think that the notion of thrift and being able to make better use of the resources you have rather than just talking about pumping more bandwidth down the pipe is a really good way of thinking about it. Tammy, do you want to chime in? Because I know you guys are looking at AI a lot in terms of how this works, and how does that factor in, especially when we get more to generative AI and in the next levels?
So that's good. Now you talk about 5G in space. We actually are involved in projects 5G on the moon. Right? It's a different story, right? But I agree with you, and this is actually again from our experience being in the wireless for a long time. NTN is coming right now at a very good time because of AI capabilities to help kind of reach the efficiency you're talking about. You're talking about how you can better utilize resources. We have so much data that is being collected already a lot for a lot of these applications. And now you're trying to move them to NTN. The question is, as we are seeing, for example, in release 19 and 20, even talk about 6G, how AI is becoming kind of an integral part of the network, doing a lot of these kind of optimization on the fly, depending on the application and the use case. I think that's a good story and a good news for NTN because they are coming now and they can benefit from that. The capabilities that AI is providing, including Gen AI that can come in and test or actually think about things you never thought about, corner cases that you have not thought about, and actually build into the NTN protocols and technology, and even in the space. I mean, you can actually put the AI on the satellites to actually make decisions on the fly depending on the situation that you are in, the current environment, the current applications, and make these decisions with the most efficient use of power, use of resources, and use of spectrum. So my point is that this will enable actually NTN actually expand faster than traditional wireless network before because you have now a toolbox that is coming that is providing a lot of maturity in this area.
Can I just add something to that? Because I think that's a really interesting point. I think the other thing we're seeing with the advent of AI, LLMs, is it's fundamentally changing the pattern of how we consume content on the internet. So as an example, my colleague here in the audience uses Perplexity to ask a question, get a response. He doesn't browse a website anymore. He talks to his AI agent voice assistant and directly has a question and answer session. And that frankly means that we're not encumbered. When we're building these networks, we're not encumbered by the history of the internet thus far. We're able to design these networks to be optimized for the next generation of AI native experiences.
Dave, do you want to chime in on this?
Yeah, I was going to say I have seen or experienced AI, but at the other end in terms of applications for IoT, satellite IoT applications, right? So Orbcomm goes to market through solution providers. So we have a network of over 400 solution providers globally. And we have one that, and these solution providers are like experts in a particular vertical, right? And they create solutions and they wrap their solutions around our products and services. And so this one example is this solution provider is involved in the protection or the poaching of endangered species in Africa, right? And so they have cameras deployed, and they have edge analytics going on those devices, and they're able to determine, you know, is this an animal or is this a human, and is this human carrying a gun, right? And then all that information is backhauled over the satellite, right? Another example is we have a partner in the fishing buoy business, right? And a fishing buoy, you know, they've got a sonar, it's connected to the satellite terminal, and they go out to sea and they throw out these buoys every mile, right? And then eventually, well, when it first started, what was happening is that based on, they detect a school of fish, and they're looking for tuna. And based on the temperature of the water, the depth of the fish, it's probabilistic that this is a school of tuna. Position is then sent to the ship. The ship goes right there, drops the nets. And you know, the amount of fuel that it saves is ginormous, right? They've now evolved to include some AI and do species recognition so that their accuracy of determining that it's a school of tuna is more accurate, right? So we've seen it, how it's evolving the applications and making more applications available for, you know, satellite IoT.
Yeah, super interesting. And we could, as with all these discussions, we could talk for hours on this, and I think there's a lot. But I've got one final lightning round question. I'm going to play the game show host here and ask you to each answer it in just 30 seconds. Albin, I'm going to start with you on this one. But looking ahead to the next 12 months, what do you think is the single biggest factor or topic that you are looking at that will help, you know, spur along this momentum, or hold it back if you want to talk about that? But the single biggest thing, if it's a technology thing, if it's a business thing, it's a regulation, whatever, just in 30 seconds, each of you. And Albin, please.
But really, you know, I brought a device here, so we're ready to actually start testing with NTN and understand, you know, whether it's working or not, right? So we're ready today. The next 6 months to 12 months, say. Our goal is to showcase real-time use cases like we did like 8 years ago, where we go out there in the field and showcase a real device, working use cases, and proving to the customers that it's low cost, is low bandwidth, and easy on power. So that's our goal for the next 6 to 12 months.
Cool. Dave?
Well, for us, we just launched our next generation satellite IoT network, and we rolled it out this summer. So we're adding more features and capabilities and higher data rate services, and our focus is opening up more applications and growing our business.
For me, we are laser focused on customer experience. We want users to have it, we want users to use it and use more of it. And whether that's in IoT, where we're doing a lot of work with our module partners, with the carriers, and ensuring a very seamless experience, ensuring there's developer documentation across the board, ensuring there's dev kits in the market, or whether that's in consumer, where we're doing a ton of work with Android and with our other partners in ensuring that the consumer native experience is frictionless. Customer experience for us is going to be the biggest unlock.
Sammy?
You know, come back to what I said at the beginning. I believe this concept of digital twin is doing something amazing that you may not be aware of, is that it's opening up research and innovation across a lot of research institutions across the country and across the world, in universities, in places that they couldn't have access to satellite technology or actually being able to actually even come up with an idea to do that. I believe this will change the industry. Because remember, I think we still have challenges that requires a lot of innovations, and the more you open it up, you'll get all the innovations in the world.
Yeah, fantastic. Guys, thank you so much. Again, it's a fantastic discussion, super interesting. We could go on. We have one final keynote speaker coming up from Ericsson, which I'm going to introduce in a minute. But thank you so much again, and we really appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we have one fantastic speaker left to take us home, and I'm going just delighted to introduce Erin Lau from Ericsson. She is the head of end-to-end 5G systems, and I think has a lot of interesting perspective to bring here as well. So Erin, please.
Thank you, Tim, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Erin Lau. I'm from Ericsson. I know it must be a long day full of insightful information exchanges, networking, and innovative products on the show floor. But we are at the final stretch right now, and I have the honor to deliver the final keynote, standing between you and the rest of your evening. But with all the excitement about the potential future convergence between terrestrial network and non-terrestrial network, I intend to leave you something equally impactful. So let's dive right in, and let's finish the summit on a high note. Imagine a world where connectivity is no longer defined by the city boundaries or the country borders or even the planet. That is the ubiquitous connectivity, the future vision that we have. Now, satellite industry has been existing for decades, but satellite is expensive. You oftentimes require a different device in order to connect to satellite. However, lately, there has been a momentum building up for NTN, non-terrestrial direct-to-device, and that device is the smartphone that's in our back pocket. So what's the market driver shaping the future of this direct-to-device non-terrestrial network? We see it with two sides, two parts. One is on the technology side. On the other hand, it's commercial and geopolitical factors. On the technology side, we all recognize that there is a need for ubiquitous connectivity. Now, I am from the telecom industry. I have worked my entire career in telecom, and with 5G's success of rolling out, very happy that right now we can say that with all the different connectivity technologies all together, we got 93% of the global population covered with connectivity. But that's if all the 93% of the global population, including you and me, are staying on 30% of the Earth. So in other words, there are 70% of the Earth, of the globe, that has no connectivity coverage. So we're still a long way to go with ubiquitous connectivity. But with all the cell phone that you and I have in our back pocket, wouldn't it be nice if we can reuse the terrestrial network devices that most of all of us have one in our back pocket and reuse the infrastructure technology that terrestrial network already have? And also lately, there is more and more talks about the chipset becoming more available to do non-terrestrial network communication and being integrated into devices. And there is more technology advancement to overcome the interference management. So altogether, on the technology side, we're seeing momentum building up for the future direct-to-handheld, direct-to-device, NTN coming together. On the other hand, is the commercial and geopolitical factors. The commercial factors, we all know that there is potentially a good new revenue opportunities that could be brought by this. As a matter of fact, from the ABI research, there is a forecast that by 2030, the market value of this non-terrestrial network D2D, direct-to-handheld devices market, can value up to about $20 billion US. So there is new revenue opportunity. There is nation sovereignty and the nation sovereignty and factor and as well as spectrum challenges as well. There is a legacy constellation versus new constellation, but there is more and more private and public partnership and alliances shaping up as well. So these are all the market drivers in the field of non-terrestrial NTN direct-to-device field. So what are the challenges and opportunities ahead of us? From our perspective, we see three parallel tracks going on right now in this market, in the NTN market, direct to handheld. The first to market is on the left-hand side. This is the proprietary NTN. It uses the dedicated NTN spectrum to avoid coexistence and regulatory hassles. It's integrated to the newest available handhelds. It works with the specific GEO constellation or LEO constellation. It has a limited monetization opportunity, primarily being provided for emergency SOS type of services. It has an unclear technology evolution path. And a good example of this proprietary NTN, it's oftentimes a partnership between the device vendors and the satellite providers. And a good example of this is Apple and Globalstar. The middle track is called a modified LTE. So in this middle track, it uses the terrestrial network spectrum. So it doesn't use the dedicated NTN spectrum. Therefore, there is considerations about regulatory concerns as well as interference management. It doesn't require new handheld. I think in the earlier session of the summit, we already talked about and heard about that. It actually works with our current phones. It works with the specific new LEO constellation. It has a monetization opportunity starting with SOS emergency services. But because it is of its proprietary manner, it is mainly between the MNO, the operators, and they partner with the satellite providers. So therefore, there is an unclear technology development track or the future. So that's the middle track. A good example in the middle track is between T-Mobile and Starlink. Another example is AST and with AT&T and Verizon. So these are all the examples for the middle track, which is utilizing LTE devices. It's an unmodified LTE. And let me just insert here, I think it's actually a good story. Just 2 days ago, there was a news that the FCC provided the temporary authorization for T-Mobile and Starlink to provide these services to the hard-hit area that's impacted by Hurricane Helene. I think that is a very good story about how this kind of connectivity is coming to help with natural disasters like hurricane. On the right-hand side is this track that most of us are looking very much forward to, which is with 3GPP 5G NTN definition. So this is with the dedicated NTN spectrum to avoid coexistence and regulatory hassles. It is to be integrated into new handhelds available in dongles from 2023. It works with existing GEO and new LEO constellation as well. And that it's going to start with SMS messaging services. Eventually, we'll get to the voice or even potentially the data offerings. And it's with open 3GPP ecosystem, so it can boost the technology adoption and development, and it's future-proof. Now, in this track, there are two different categories of potential offerings that can be offered. One is more about the IoT services. On the other hand is NR NTN, the 5G NTN, that is more for the mobile broadband services. So all these three tracks are currently going on, and with all the momentum, we're seeing the development of these three tracks gaining really a lot of interest in the development and the facilitation of this. So let's dive a little bit deeper into what is the challenge really on the technical side. So this is the illustration of the satellite versus the Earth. And because I'm a technology person, I just love to talk about technology. And here, talking about technological challenges. So here you can see geo-satellite. That is geostationary satellites over the Earth orbit. It is normally stationary, and it's about more than 36 or 38,000 kilometers above the ground. The round trip time is fairly long, obviously, because of the long distance. So it's oftentimes about 480 millisecond to 500 millisecond. But the GEO satellite stays stationary relative to the Earth surface. On the other hand, LEO, which is low Earth orbit, they're closer to the Earth. They're between a couple of hundreds kilometer or up to 2,000 kilometer above the ground. So the round trip time is shorter. It's about in the tens of a millisecond range, and here is about 20 milliseconds. However, it moves, it circles around the Earth, and it moves at the speed of 8 kilometers per second. Now, this long round trip delay doesn't just mean that you will get the data a few seconds later. It's not just that, because the long propagation delay, it's going to mess up the scheduling. So for the terrestrial network, when we talked about scheduling, when we talk about putting the time slot are at the millisecond level. So with such a long propagation delay, it's going to mess up the alignment, the timing alignment, and the synchronization. And therefore, between the device and the satellite or the base station, there's got to do more synchronization, timing synchronization to compensate this long propagation delay. And also for LEO satellite, because if it's moving, there's also Doppler's effect. So it is going to drift on the frequency that it intends to operate on. So there is a lot of challenges to work through in order to make this to work with the terrestrial network, with 5G. So I'm very happy that 3GPP actually have started a lot of work to try to overcome the technological challenges. Starting in 3GPP release 17, there is the definition of MSS, mobile satellite spectrum, for L-band and S-band, and they're primarily between 1 gigahertz and 2 gigahertz range. 3GPP also defines the basic NTN functionalities and global ecosystem support in Release 17. Release 18, there's more spectrum being offered, more for fixed wireless, fixed satellite spectrum, which is analogous to fixed wireless access on the ground. And they're mainly in the 10 to 20 gigahertz range. And there's more performance and coverage enhancement. For both Release 17 and Release 18, it is called a transparent mode, which in other words, the base station, all the signal, the RF signal processing happens on the ground. The satellite is merely a relay to basically get the signal to the satellite, from the satellite to the device, but all the processing is done on the ground. That's called the transparent mode. Release 19 will start to put some of the base station functionalities. It could be the RU or part of the DU. It is still under a lot of discussion and study, potentially putting some part of the processing on the satellite payload, and that is called a regenerative mode. So a lot of the technical development and study is going on to try to make this work, and 3GPP is leading that collaboration, that technical definition for all of us, for the ecosystem here. Okay, so from the previous discussion, as you can see, the convergence between terrestrial network and non-terrestrial network really needs a collaborative ecosystem to make this a success. No one part can make it a success. And so with that, I'd like to talk a little bit about the industry consortia that have been active and working on all these discussions about how to make this work. And leading in this slide here is the 3GPP that I talked already, starting in release 17, and then 18 and 19, to be adopted into the 5G offerings as part of the 3GPP open standards to assure mass adoption and economies of scale of the tested technology. GSMA has a NTN community with the shared vision of alignment between mobile networks operator and satellite network operators. MSSA, that's Mobile Satellite Service Alliance, with the shared vision of enabling D2D, direct-to-device services leveraging MSS spectrum using 3GPP standard. And here I want to share also a little bit news that is very recent. Just 2 days ago, GSMA and MSSA just announced the alliance to work together collaboratively to enable this ecosystem to come together for 5G NTN. And also, Ericsson is actively contributing and participating in this. About 3 weeks ago, Ericsson also just made an announcement to join MSSA, and we're very proud to play a key player in this 5G NTN arena. And obviously, it's not limited to these that I have mentioned. There is a 6G NTN alliance that is happening. There's also 5G AA that is very active in this NTN arena, mainly focusing on the application on automobile, on cars. Now, with that, I'd like to offer a quick overview of MSSA, the Mobile Satellite Service Association. It is an association with 5 founding members from the satellite players. The mission is to facilitate and accelerate the 5G NTN services to direct-to-device by using the dedicated NTN spectrum following the 3GPP standard, and that is also what Ericsson has recently joined to join force to try to get this ecosystem together and bring this vision into a reality. And I also like to let you know that if you're interested in knowing more about this association, MSSA actually has a booth that's just right across from the stage here. So after the keynote, if you're interested, please stop by, and I'm sure that there are representatives and from the founding companies will be there to answer your questions. Okay, so with all what we talked about, you can clearly see that 5G NTN together with the cellular network, the terrestrial network, can provide the global coverage in the most economical way. And Ericsson is very excited about this vision and this future. So Ericsson is actively participating in this. Ericsson's contribution to the satellite industry can be from the 5G systems, the 5G experience that we have, because Ericsson, as a 5G leader, we bring with us a lot of 5G system expertise, from RAN to core to transport to security, hardware and software. We also bring an essential 3GPP intellectual property portfolio. We're very active in 3GPP standardization. We're very experienced in the interoperability with the device vendors. And we have established the global MNO outreach. And so from Ericsson's perspective, we are actually working with technology partners on joint studies, test beds, proof of concepts, and broad ecosystem outreach, working with 3GPP, GSMA, and MSSA. So Ericsson, as a 5G leader, and I've been with Ericsson for many years, and I am a hopeless 5G enthusiast. After a successful rollout of 5G nationwide or globally, and after bringing 5G into enterprises with private networks, into the household with fixed wireless access, I just couldn't be more excited about taking 5G into the space. And so here we're calling all the ecosystem players to come together and help us to shape the future, the vision of ubiquitously connected future for all of us. Thank you very much.